On Wednesday, 22nd June 2011, this is Fair Observer, a new multimedia journal that enables you to make sense of the world. I am Atul Singh, founder and editor-in-chief, and with me is Justin Dargan, a research fellow at the Dubai Institute at Harvard Kennedy School. Today we'll be talking about global energy and the Middle East, and without further ado, I'm going to pose to Justin my first question. So Justin, what role, in your estimate, did rising energy prices play in triggering the Arab Spring?
Well, I think, Atul, that rising energy prices actually had several different roles, so it's a bit multifaceted. Now, on one hand, it's not necessary that it was the rising price of oil or natural gas that precipitated much of the political discontent. However, what we've discovered is that when you look at the rise in the price of basic foodstuffs, and this has actually been an ongoing affair from about 2001 until its more or less peak in 2008, and then we see a slight decline, then an increase again in 2009, 2010, 2011. Now, why did this happen? Well, a major part of this increase in the price of basic foodstuffs had to do with biofuel production policies of Western countries and also large emerging markets such as China and India as well. So there have just been enormous amounts of basic foodstuffs that have been turned into fuel, more or less, for two major reasons. On one hand, there was the goal to mitigate carbon emissions on the part of many of the Western countries, so that's why they want to increase biofuel production. And then on the side of some of the major emerging markets, such as China, we see this drive for energy security. So, for instance, China does not want to be tied into or necessarily dependent on imports emanating from the Middle East or from other regions, because it views that if there's any type of disruption, then it's more or less a national security issue. So China wants to increase its biofuel production, and by this way, it could seek to diversify its energy production and also its imports. So for the past decade, we've seen increases or increasing pressure on the price of basic foodstuffs in most of the developing world due to these energy policies. So the part that this played, or the role that this played in terms of the Arab Spring, if we look at Tunisia, where the Arab Spring started, we can see basically in the months leading up to the protests and the riots and so on and so forth, there was about a 20 to 30% increase in the price of basic foodstuffs. Okay, if we look at index that's been used by the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, and that actually in the year of 2010, that this was actually the largest increase across the board in terms of the 20 or so foodstuffs that it tracks that it's actually ever seen. So I mean, I think that this is quite significant. So yes, there are underlying political grievances, okay, in the Middle East, yes, of course. But I don't necessarily think that this was the only issue, no. Because if we look at other countries that don't necessarily have political systems that meet, let's say, the requirements of Western democracy, but yet at the same time, they have an economic system which has more or less been able to move many of the people out of poverty. So if we look at Singapore, we look at Korea for much of its history after the Korean War.
So fundamentally what you're saying is that as long as society, as long as a country has a political system that is delivering on the economic front and is meeting its basic governance obligations, you'll be fine. But if there is an underlying malfunction and there is huge grievance, then the price of bread, like it always has historically, might lead to revolution. And that the rise in price in bread, or let's say food, bread being metaphoric for food, was fundamentally because of rising energy prices. So the unrest in the Middle East, the Arab Spring, owes itself in great deal to the rising energy prices.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, I would say this. Now, I mean, of course, in other countries where you don't necessarily have a liberal system, I don't think that I don't think that merely delivering economic goods will satisfy the people once they reach a certain level. So when the majority of the people are at a middle class level or what have you, then I think that they would want to have an increasing say in governance. So I think that there is a type of double movement, whereas while the country is developing, I think that the people will mute their political demands, but then once they reach a certain level, then they will want to have other things. Okay, then they want to have,
ratchet up.
Right, exactly.
The demand will ratchet up.
Exactly.
So let's move on to the second question and swing the conversation in the direction of energy. And my question here is, the Arab Spring, a glorious, wonderful thing, but what effect has it had on energy prices? It, of course, was affected by energy prices. What, in turn, has its effect been on energy prices?
Well, it had an immediate effect, actually. When we look at Tunisia, after protests started in Tunisia, we start to see a type of incremental increase in the international price of oil. Now, the increase was not necessarily that significant or that large, but it was perceptible. Okay, so this was evident. And when Egypt started to happen, then actually there was a larger increase in the international price of oil. So the question that we really must ask is, why is this? Because Tunisia is not an energy-producing country. It's an energy-importing country. Egypt does produce minimal amounts of oil and natural gas, but it really has no significant impact in terms of the international oil or natural gas market. So we have to ask this question, and fundamentally, initially, it was due to speculation. Okay, so it was due to the impact that investors and speculators and also the futures market has on the international oil sector that really caused this increase in the price of the international price of oil. And that was one major factor. And why were speculators and investors concerned? Well, they were concerned simply because, not necessarily due to the proximate impact of let's say, the Egyptian revolution or so on and so forth, even though that was there. Some people thought that there might be an outburst in, let's say, incidences of terrorism against oil infrastructure, or that the Suez Canal might be blocked, and all this later on, of course, proved not to happen. But the primary fear was that this would spread. So it would be like a contagion. That's what many people thought,
exactly.
Right? So that this would spread immediately to the to the elephant in the room. And what is the elephant in the room? It's Saudi Arabia, of course, and also it's some of the other major oil producing countries.
Yeah.
So that was the major fear. So it wasn't necessarily due to Egypt and Tunisia by themselves. It was due to the potential impact that this Arab Spring could have on principally Saudi Arabia. So so we start to see,
and that brings me on to the next question, that the Arab Spring is like a genie which is now out of the bottle. It's only the beginning of continued unrest in the Middle East.
Yes.
Because this is a process that will continue. People will have greater demands. Those in establishments will try to retain power. There is going to be internal friction in almost every country, including Saudi Arabia. And so the question now is, what are the prospects for the Middle East to continue to be a reliable energy supplier in the light of the fact that the genie is now out of the bottle?
Okay. Well, that's a very good point. Although we have to remember is that outside of Libya, and Libya really is not it doesn't really have a major impact on the international oil sector. I mean, Libya only exports about 2%, you could say, of the international oil supply. So I mean, it's not really that big of a player. But when you look at Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and so on, obviously these are major players. But as of yet, the Arab Spring has not had a structural impact on the energy sector. It has not. So it has not upset the basic dynamics of the market forces of supply and demand. So there hasn't been any type of pressure on production anywhere in the Middle East, outside of Libya, of course, and perhaps minimally in Egypt. And I don't necessarily think that Saudi Arabia, the dynamics of each Arab country are different. Okay, they're
Correct.
not the same,
I agree.
obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, so in
Correct.
Tunisia, you have rates of secularization that you don't have in Egypt.
Yeah.
In Egypt, you have rates of poverty that you don't have in Saudi Arabia. And also you have a sectarian element in Saudi Arabia that you don't have in other countries. So, so the issues are quite different. So I do question as to whether this Arab Spring is necessarily going to impact in a big way the major oil producers. And I don't necessarily think that will be the case when you look at the major Gulf oil producers. I don't think that would be the case. I think that, yes, there will be some type of dissent, there will be some type of discord, but I think that the basic elements of production, the structural issues are not really going to be touched.
Okay, so this brings me on to the next question. You say production is not going to be touched, the basic structural elements are not going to be changed. So what does it mean for prices and energy security? Is it all going to be hunky-dory and this play of prices is speculation and fear? Or do you think that the continued instability is going to ratchet up oil prices because of the psychological effect or something else?
Well, I do think that, it's not going to be hunky-dory. Okay, definitely not. Okay, because there was this one speaker I recall from several weeks ago that I heard. He did not refer to it as the Arab Spring; he referred to it as the Arab firestorm. Okay, and this really is. It's a firestorm, really. And the thing is, it's not. One of the things that we tend to forget is that this is not focused on the Middle East. There are about 20 or 30 countries now that are undergoing extreme political discontent at the moment that this political discontent is derived from the demonstration effect that we saw in the Middle East. So one thing that really hasn't been discussed is what's going on in Africa. There are many countries in Africa that are going now through some type of political discontent simply because they saw what was going on in the Middle East. And even if we look at Europe, okay, if we look at Greece, if we look at Spain, there's a movement. Sincerely, it's called the movement. I think the May 15th movement or something along those lines. M15.
This thought even in India, there's a huge cry over corruption.
Yeah, exactly.
The communists have been thrown out in West Bengal after 34 years of uninterrupted power. So there's a lot going on globally.
There's a lot. Globally. So this is an important issue. Frankly. But I don't think that, if you look at the basic elements of supply and demand, okay, look at it now, since the Arab Spring, let's say, started in January, go back about a year ago, okay, not much has changed. Okay, there really has not.
So let me get back to the question again. So what do you think, in precise terms, will be the impact on global energy prices and security, global energy security?
Okay, well, one, in terms of the international energy, I want to say international oil prices, because more or less it's not really going to have an impact on the prices of natural gas, international prices of natural gas.
Yeah.
So in terms of oil prices, I think that, yes, it's going to have a significant impact, and I think a lot of this is driven by the fear premium. Okay, so if we look at or speculation and the futures market and so on, so the oil market today is more or less like the stock market. Okay, and why do I say that? It's that if you want to see how IBM, a lot of the stock prices are not due to how the company's actually doing. It's due to investors' perceptions of how the country or how the company is going to do, and that's more or less how the oil market is today. It's like the stock market, okay? So it's really driven by buyers' perceptions of how the market's going to be, any type of future constraints, and so on and so forth. But I think that due to this aspect, yes, there's going to be an impact, and I think that for the next several years, that we're going to see an increase in the price, international price of oil, due to the Arab Spring and due to the perception that the region is not stable and that it may roll over into other areas. But at the same time, I think it's important to remember, Atul, is that there has been structural forces at play that has really driven up the international price of oil incrementally. Okay, so if we look at
you allude presumably to the increasing demand of emerging markets
Yeah,
all the way from Brazil
exactly.
to China.
Exactly. And when the global economy picks back up, as many people think it may in the next few years, then this will also be another structural impact. So I think that there's going to be a confluence of these two trends. There's going to be obviously the speculative effect, which is the effect that's going to have on international price of oil, and then there's also going to be the more long-term and incremental structural the structural rise in the price of oil, the international price of oil.
So prices will go up.
Yes, prices are
and
going
what
to go
about
up.
and what about security? Security is not a concern, you think?
Well,
not
I
yet,
mean,
anyway.
energy security, not really. I mean, the only way that I would see energy security playing a role is that energy security is not really related to high prices. That's a different issue.
No, it isn't.
I would say
It is related to disruption in supply.
disruption.
Related to it's something that's happening in Libya, happening perhaps in Saudi Arabia. That would throw the world in a tizzy.
That's correct. That's correct. And also, many different countries or different countries view energy security in different ways. So the United States views energy security as, let's say, removing its dependence on, let's say, outside sources of energy, such as the Middle East or Latin America, and increasing indigenous production. Europe, the European Union views energy security as what? As removing itself from dependence on imports from Russia, and principally in natural gas, and diversifying its imports from other regions, principally the Middle East, which is in contradistinction to what the U.S. is actually trying to do. So energy security actually is different. It means different things to different stakeholders. But to get back to your question, what role I think it's going to have in terms of energy security, I don't think it will have much of a role in terms of the basic nuts and bolts of energy security, in terms of disrupting exports. I don't think so. The only way that would happen is if there's some type of, let's say, radical government that comes to power in one of the major oil-producing countries, a type of
Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and declares war on Israel.
Something along something along those lines. Yes, or let's say they decide that okay, we're not going to export to the West anymore. We're going to embargo the West.
Send it all to China.
Right, send it to China. Although that would have repercussions on them as well, because it's a marriage, more or less. I mean, it's a mutual dependency. I don't really see that happening. I just see prices increasing over. I mean, obviously in the short term, midterm, and long term. But I don't see there being any type of substantive disruption.
Okay, now this brings me on the next question, which is, are there any viable alternatives? You've talked about increasing demand, inexorable demand, and I said, are there any viable alternatives to oil, especially given what has happened in Fukushima?
I think that in terms of, when we look at the role of oil in the international economy, the role of oil is really predicated on the transportation sector. Okay, so this is quite important. There are minimal amounts of oil used in power generation, but for the most part, power generation all over the world is dependent upon natural gas, and then also there's nuclear energy
or coal in China,
or coal in China, yes, but there's really not that much oil. Okay, so we have to look at the transportation sector. In terms of the transportation sector, I don't really see any viable alternatives at the moment, although I do see it coming. As we've seen in the U.S., there are now increasing ads for electric cars, hybrid cars, and what have you. But it would take, I would say, about a generation for there to be any type of substantive transition away from cars that are, obviously cars are using gasoline to, let's say, electric cars. And also with the economic slump currently, it's going to extend this time period. So obviously many people are not going to go for that electric car. Right.
We are all set for an oil economy.
Right, exactly. At least I would say for this generation. So I think in terms of natural gas, though, there has been, let's say, a type of shift towards natural gas, at least conceptually, in the wake of Fukushima. So I don't think Fukushima is really going to have a role in terms of the oil economy, but in terms of, let's say, the transition that at least was in the making, the nuclear renaissance, as they called it, since 2000, yes, it's definitely going to have an impact. It's going to have an impact on the popular level in terms of the NIMBY concept, not in my backyard. We already see this happening in the U.S. We see it happening in Europe and so on. There's been a comprehensive reassessment on the role of nuclear energy in many countries that were really basing most of their climate mitigation or their carbon mitigation goals on increasing nuclear energy production. Absolutely. Now there's a reassessment. But I really don't...
Look, the Greens are in power in Baden-Württemberg, a conservative state, a conservative place in Germany. And the Greens came into power thanks to Fukushima. So clearly, there will be huge public uproar now whenever someone wants to build a nuclear power station in their backyard.
There is. But I don't...
So here's my question. Now, given that, what does this do to climate change, global climate change strategy? The nuclear renaissance is over. So what next?
Well, I wouldn't be as bold as of yet to say the nuclear renaissance is over. I think it's still in the making. Okay, this is a very fluid situation, as some people like to say. There are a lot of different moving parts. Okay, but definitely it's put on hold, I would say. Okay, so I think that's a major issue. And my perception of what's going to happen, my forecast is that there are just going to be increasing safeguards that are going to be placed on nuclear energy. There's going to be some type of pullback, but it's not going to be the same type of reaction that we saw in the wake of 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, where there was a full-scale pullback or retrenchment, let's say, of nuclear energy. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of our climate change goals, yes, I mean, I think that this is a fundamental contradiction. Okay, and there are many different contradictions in place, but I mean, the fundamental one is that, okay, we as a world, we want to move away from, let's say, hydrocarbons as a fuel source. But as of yet, there's really nothing that can take that place at the moment, except for nuclear energy on let's say, a broad scale. Okay, truly. And then on the other hand, we still talk about economic growth. Okay, so economic growth is the mantra that we hear from most politicians, particularly in the wake of the global economic crisis. But what does economic growth mean? It means increasing consumption, and it also means increasing energy use. So if you really want to tackle energy consumption, and also there's an organic linkage between energy consumption and carbon emissions, you really have to lower your economic growth, because economic growth is a major issue. And when we look at, let's say, several instances in history with the collapse of the Soviet Union, when that happened in 1991, the carbon emissions from the former Soviet Union, I think they were nearly halved. It was cut nearly in half. Okay, so and also
so you're not advocating a deep and painful global recession to save the world.
I'm not. But we have to be realistic. We really have to be realistic about, okay, if you don't want nuclear energy, and then at the same time you want to have economic growth 3 to 4% every year, then how are you going to do this while still meeting your carbon mitigation
Basically,
goals?
you're saying that's not possible. They are mutually exclusive.
I would say yes.
What you're saying is, if you want economic growth, you have to have nuclear energy. That is the only way you can lower the climate impact.
I would say so.
Environmental impact.
Yes. Okay. Another way, though, that you could have a type of impact, of course, is natural gas. And transitioning, let's say, coal from natural gas, that would have an immediate impact. Okay, obviously. Okay, and with the shale gas revolution in the U.S., okay, that has really had a major impact in terms of, let's say, lowering our carbon emissions. But then we have to look at the next stage, okay, because natural gas is still a hydrocarbon. So there's still carbon emissions inherent in that, in its use. So then to move from the next stage from...
But a lot cleaner than oil.
Yes, it's a lot cleaner than coal. Yes, obviously. But then if we want to...
Sorry, a lot cleaner than coal.
Yes, absolutely. But if we want to move from natural gas to, let's say, decarbonizing our economy, because you don't decarbonize with the natural gas because it's still a hydrocarbon, then you would have to go to nuclear energy. So that I think that's the conundrum.
But that again brings this question of waste. So, and with nuclear energy, we don't know what the long-term impact of that waste might be. How safe can you store away that waste? It festers in half-life, questions of radiation. I mean, that has its questions of safety, questions of fixed costs, because nuclear power plants are expensive. So, I mean, that has its own whole slew of environmental questions. Maybe you're swapping one set of environmental problems for another.
Yes, yes. I mean, I think it's akin to whether there's a type of acute condition or chronic condition. Okay, so
Yes.
with nuclear energy production, there's a risk that there could be some type of acute disaster, such as Fukushima, which is on the news, and so on and so forth. Okay, but with climate change, this is a long-term chronic condition. It's a long-term chronic condition. So I would say that we'd have to weigh these elements, whether we're willing to accept. And I think that actually, from what I understand, most climate scientists really say that it's too late to change. That now it's all about climate adaptation. Really, that they're not seriously that we should focus on this. And many cities in the U.S. have been doing this. Chicago has now put in place a multi-decade-year plan for climate adaptation. Okay, to deal with several percentage rise in temperatures. And then many other cities and states are doing that. So from what I understand is that some climate scientists, they don't want to say to the populace at large that climate change is happening now. And that due to the cumulative effect of carbon in the atmosphere, that there's really nothing we can do now that would have an immediate impact. That we just have to wait it out for the next 50 or 100 years until everything that we're doing now starts to have an impact. So it might be too late to actually do something about climate change per se, but from what I understand, they don't want to make people afraid, and they want to at least give people some type of impression that they can still do something. But I don't think that, from what I understand.
So it's too late to do anything. So let's all adapt for the oncoming apocalypse.
I mean, not necessarily an apocalypse, but
I'm just joking.
Of course. Of course.
The name of the game now is adaptation to change climate rather than trying to control and mitigate the change, because that perhaps is not possible anymore.
Right.
The high watermark has been crossed.
Right, and get used to the era of extreme climatic events. Okay, so get used to that.
Yeah.
Getting used to floods, getting used to hurricanes, getting used to tornadoes, getting used to climate refugees. The Pentagon, in its annual, I think it's the National Security Assessment or whatnot, in 2003, it stated that for the first time, it really attempted to grapple with the impact that climate change is going to have on national security. Now, what's going to happen in the developing world, where they don't have the luxury to really put into place millions of dollars of climate adaptation or infrastructural plans, okay, to deal with this, and then you have the rise of climate refugees. How is Europe going to deal with this? How is the United States going to deal with this? How are you going to deal with increasing rates of radicalization in the developing world when there's a type of when they feel that their governments are not really able to do something, extreme climatic events at the same time, you start to have these a push towards the developing world, or towards the developed world in terms of refugees, and then the developed world, as we know, is becoming increasingly hostile towards immigration. So are we going to turn into a world where we're going to have the shining city or cities on a hill that are going to be patrolled by, more or less drones and, mercenaries and so on and so forth to keep these individuals out because we're afraid of the impact?
It's a Hollywood vision. So let's get back to two mundane questions and close the conversation. Question one is, two concluding questions. Question one, what is the short-term scenario for global energy over the next 5 years?
Well, over the next 5 years, we're going to see an increasing energy prices, increasing prices of oil, and I don't think that this is necessarily going to stop in the short term. So we're going to see this over the next 5 years.
Fine. Question two: what is the long-term scenario, given what we talked about, the structural change that is increasing demand?
long-term scenario, I don't think that we're necessarily going to see these, let's say, sharp increases in the price of international price of oil, but we're going to see a long-term trend as the emerging markets really start to take the lion's share of energy and oil imports, and then also as we see the economic recovery start to take place in the developed world. So we're going to see a long-term, much more incremental increase in the price of the international price of oil for the long term.
And yeah, until the next generation comes and there's a new technology to take.
Yeah, when I say the long term, actually, I should qualify this. I would say 2020, 2025.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Okay, Justin Dagen, a pleasure and an honor to have you with Fair Observer. Thank you for your most insightful comments, and we look forward to speaking to you very soon.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Atul. I appreciate it. It was much a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye.
Bye. Have a great day. Bye.
You too. Bye.